This film begins by showing a man named John who wakes up in a large hole with the sad condition of losing his memory. And it turned out that in the big hole, there was quite a pile of human corpses, and it made John panic and hysterical. And there suddenly John found a gun. After that, John shouted for help. Not long after, suddenly someone held out a rope. John, who saw the rope, immediately got out of the terrible hole. In heavy rain conditions, John tried to find shelter, and in the end, because it was nightfall, he found a very quiet house. But when he was about to enter the house, John suddenly heard the sound of people talking. Out of curiosity as to what had happened, John decided to return to the house while brandishing the gun he had found just in case. After he was inside, he saw several people gathered, including the person who had helped him get out of the corpse hole, named Brown. They panic and the situation becomes tense. There was an argument because they blamed each other about who was the bad person who had killed the people in the hole. As the situation escalated, the groups were finally able to produce important information if neither of them remembered anything. However, these 4 people assumed that they had an identity left behind with the names Lucas, Sharon, Michael, and the man lying in pain named Nathan. The situation was somewhat under control until in the end, they returned to discussing who was the person who had the heart to put them in this place with thousands of corpses collected. However, in the middle of the conversation, they began to feel suspicious and wary of John's presence because he did not have any identification, unlike the others. Meanwhile, Brown is seen as a woman who doesn't speak their language, then tries to explain something that not everyone understands, which adds to the impression of confusion that is becoming increasingly uncontrollable. Brown, who didn't understand English, tried to look like he wanted to give them all the important information about this. However, feeling like they didn't want to take risks, they agreed to work together. Initially, they planned to check the entire house. There, Lucas found an injection mark on his arm. Brown also has this. But again, when Brown tried to say something, Lucas didn't understand. I also looked so confused because the woman had difficulty communicating. After the process of combing the house area was complete, in the house they seemed to find a lot of food supplies that seemed to have been well provided. And John found something stuck to a refrigerator cupboard. John didn't understand what it meant when he saw a calendar with the 18th circled, and John quickly asked Brown about it, but didn't understand what Brown was explaining. Meanwhile, something else felt increasingly strange when the group found several weapons complete with bullets. It's as if there is something dangerous. After getting to know a little about what was around him, John then tried to clean himself and treat the wounds he had suffered. And little by little John got a picture of memories from his past. Sometime later, they saw Brown running in the forest. Sharon, John, and Lucas decided to go look for Brown, while Michael and Nathan were on duty to guard the house area. However, during the process of searching for Brown, in the middle of the journey John felt that other memories came back. In that memory, he was dragging a corpse. At the same time, they smelled a very strong smell which turned out to be coming from one of the corpses tied to a tree. This makes them confused about who did this crazy thing. But it turns out there wasn't just one, several bodies looked similar and whose deaths were so tragic. Furthermore, they now saw a very dark but far from where they were. When they decided to go inside, it turned out that Brown was already there and was giving food to a woman who was tied up. But suddenly the woman was afraid when she saw John. The woman said that John had used me, which confused them. Then Lucas, who believed that the woman knew John, immediately told Sharon that John was a dangerous person. And at that moment the tied woman immediately attacked John. Seeing this, John immediately hit the woman. Next, Lucas saw a CCTV camera and said that someone was watching them all, and assumed that they had to find the location of the monitor. The next day, they all planned to look for vehicles in the outside area. Even before leaving, they had a brief argument because Michael didn't accept being given the task of looking after the house again. But in the end, because they had no choice, they immediately started searching. Then, Lucas, Sharon, Nathan, and John now started working together to look for a vehicle very carefully through the forest. They also seemed to be used to finding people who had died tied to a tree in such a tragic way as they found at night. Meanwhile, at home, Michael, who was talking to Brown, was still complaining and couldn't accept being left behind. But their conversation had to stop when they heard screams from inside the forest. Then Michael asked Brown to come inside immediately. Then immediately looked for the source of the sound and saw a man tied to a wire fence with serious injuries. The man, who looked in pain, then asked Michael for help. Seeing this, Michael felt sorry for him and tried to help. But unexpectedly, when Michael tried to help, the man suddenly attacked and strangled him. It turns out it seems like the man is one of the people infected with a virus like a zombie. Michael, who was strangled by barbed wire, couldn't do anything. Then the man stabbed him, causing a large amount of blood to flow from Michael's body, and as a result, Mitchell died helplessly. Back to John and the group, who had now found a footpath and they were trying to continue exploring the place with focus. When Nathan was idly throwing a pebble in a random direction, suddenly the pebble hit something. After checking, it turned out that the sound came from a pile of twigs piled up. Those who were curious decided to remove the branches. It turned out that something surprising now appeared when they found 2 cars. Then they happily immediately tried to take the 2 cars home. But after checking, only 1 car had fuel. When they were about to leave, Lucas found a photo in the car which made him sure that they all knew each other. But strangely, there was no photo of John in the photo, making them a little distance from John. With the group's memories being lost, it certainly made Lucas increasingly distrustful of who John was. Seeing this, I immediately said that I would return home immediately. But at the same time, Lucas saw Brown running towards those who were panicking and asking for help. Then, they are now taken by Brown and are immediately shocked when they are shown Michael, who is dying due to the actions of the mysterious man who was tied up earlier. Sharon then tried to help, but unfortunately, their help was too late and Michael finally gave up on his life. This made John, who was angry at the man who was tied up, immediately shoot him without mercy because he thought you were crazy, considering that they didn't know what was going on. After that incident, Sharon at least had an idea if something was wrong, then tried to find information about this problem. Currently, they are looking at a building and the 2 of them are trying to enter the building. You can also see there is a number 18 which is the same as written in the house information area. Those who were increasingly curious immediately found out what they could find in the building. While Sharon was looking in the mirror, suddenly she saw a boy running. Immediately, they tried to find out where the child had gone until finally they found a locked door. When they tried to peek, it turned out that Sharon saw a child and the child asked John to leave immediately because it would soon be the 18th. The child's words confused John because it meant the child recognized me, immediately asked for an explanation, but the result of the child not paying attention made John come back unable to understand everything that had happened. I was immediately calmed by Sharon, so I immediately returned to the house area according to the child's instructions. Meanwhile, Brown, Nathan, and Lucas were waiting at home when suddenly something surprising happened. At that time, Brown saw that Lucas was silent and said that his memory was starting to return. Lucas immediately assumed that I seemed to know Brown, but I didn't know what happened. Suddenly Lucas hurt Brown, making Nathan and Brown, who couldn't stop thinking and panicked, immediately decide to go into the forest, leaving Lucas behind. However, when they arrived at the hut where they had visited last night, Brown was very surprised when he did not see the woman who was tied up yesterday. After that, Nathan, who wanted to know who this person was, decided to go alone to explore his memories more deeply about this forest. On the way, I found a place and glasses that were probably mine. And sure enough, when he tried wearing the glasses, Nathan started to get his memory back. Then, when he was about to enter a room, he found a woman who was infected like he was in prison. However, unfortunately, his memory had not fully returned, making Nathan try to help the woman. Until this triggered the woman's bluff, Nathan, who knew that the woman was dangerous, immediately left. However, before leaving he also found another group like the woman. And finally, I know that they are dangerous. Meanwhile, Brown, who was left behind by Nathan, returned home and found Lucas in confusion. There, Lucas got several memory images and then tried to find information about the hidden underground room. But they instead found something different. The room was like a lab until finally Lucas found a camera which from the recording contained video if in the recording it was seen that there was a man who turned out to be John. I was shocked after finding out the contents of the recording, which turned out to be John conducting biological experiments on Brown and Lucas. In the video, Lucas was seen convulsing and it made me so angry, because he thought that John was the cause of people going crazy and then losing their memories. Meanwhile, John and Sharon were on their way home. They both told each other that maybe they knew each other because they looked familiar. While they were having fun chatting, suddenly a tree fell, blocking their path. They immediately got out of the car and started checking around the place. From a distance, John heard noises which turned out to be a group of people cutting down trees. Sharon also said that I had a bad feeling about that. John, who was curious, seemed careless and instead called these people. Those who feel called immediately pursue it quickly. Sharon and John immediately ran to avoid pursuit. When they returned to the car to leave, their car suddenly didn't start and John decided to push the car. But what was even more strange was that the people suddenly stopped chasing. This made them wonder why this was happening. It turned out that 2 bodies were hanging from a tree. John said maybe the person didn't like the stench of the corpses and made them stop chasing. They decided to return home because they saw this. When he got home, it turned out that Lucas was there waiting with a rifle. Lucas threatens John to stay there, saying that John is the one who caused them all to lose their memories. Lucas immediately showed the camera to Sharon and asked Sharon to believe it. Sharon, who saw the recording, thought that John was a bad person. Plus, Sharon now finds the same wound as Lucas, an injection as if they were being used as experimental material. After hitting John with a weapon, Lucas immediately took John to the corpse pit. After arriving, Lucas told John to immediately enter the hole and John, who was pressed by this situation, could only follow the instructions. When John was in the pile of corpses, I remembered something again that seemed to answer what I was thinking. Meanwhile, Sharon and Brown see Lucas who has now returned home. Lucas immediately invited Sharon and Brown to leave the place by car. But before leaving, Sharon asked where Nathan was because she didn't want to leave him. Lucas felt confused about Nathan's whereabouts because they hadn't seen him before. Apart from that, Sharon also felt that there was something strange about Lucas because she felt that he was not healthy. But Lucas still said that I was fine and said that I would look after them both. However, the strange behavior that Lucas showed made Sharon and Brown seem afraid. Apart from that, it was also seen that Lucas' ears were bleeding and he had turned aggressive. Brown seemed to know something but couldn't say a word because he could only run from there to avoid Lucas. Because he saw the woman leaving, Lucas was tempted to immediately give chase. Sharon immediately headed upstairs carrying a rifle and threatening Lucas. Seeing the weapons, Lucas immediately ran away, leaving them. Meanwhile, John, who was still in the corpse pit, suddenly saw someone drop a rope which turned out to be Brown. Returned to help John get there. After successfully climbing, Brown immediately wrote the number 18 on the ground and tried to help John remember something. Then they went home, but John, who didn't know who he was, asked Brown to stay away from me for fear of endangering Brown's safety. Meanwhile, I will go first by car to find out what happened. Meanwhile, Sharon is now seen reading a book that contains information about the human brain. I also noticed there was a note that inscribed John's name which made Sharon curious. Then continue to understand what is in the book. On the other hand, John returned to the old building there. He tried to go inside and there were lots of tents which looked like they were refugee camps. After searching around, I couldn't find yesterday's child. Then John went into the tent and found a box. The box made him remember something. Then he started looking for something that could be used to restore his memory. And accidentally, he saw a map on the floor. John immediately took it and made his memory even clearer. Then he marked a path on the map according to what his memory directed him to do. But suddenly he had to stop because his memory had not fully returned. When John came out of the tent, he seemed to hear a sound which turned out to be two infected people. One of them tried to attack. John, unable to resist, immediately shot him. After successfully leaving the refugee building, John is currently following the map he marked himself. On the way, John saw someone running towards a car. You can see a woman and a small child who are in a hurry. John also asked if the woman recognized me and that the little child was a child in the refugee building. The woman answered that John was one of them and asked him to move away immediately. After saying that, the woman immediately got into the car. And, in the car, there was an infected woman. After the woman left, John found a box and immediately opened it. It turned out that what was inside was a vaccine for a virus that attacks the human brain. This virus begins with symptoms of headache. Previously, John had sent boxes containing vaccines with the help of someone to be delivered to residents. But it turned out that the person had an accident in a car. John also found a letter and finally found out that he was a doctor and the leader of the research. A vaccine for the virus has been found, but there is a side effect, namely that people who take the vaccine will lose their memory but are free from infection. This is what is happening to them now. I also remember that Sharon is my wife. After that, I saw a car passing by. It turned out that it was Lucas who wanted to hit John's car. John, who saw the pain, said if I could help him he would be infected again. Then immediately take the vaccine. But Lucas, who was half conscious, attacked. John, who was not cornered, immediately took a stone that was next to him and hit Lucas on the head. But before he died, Lucas thanked him because he had given him his memory back. After that, John immediately went home and wanted to save my wife. Meanwhile, Nathan, who has remembered all his past, is now returning home. Sharon also said that I had remembered everything. But not long afterward, a group of infected people arrived trying to get inside. On the other hand, John increasingly remembers everything that started to become like this. At that time, John was bitten by one of the infected people and immediately injected the vaccine into his arm, and the effect was that he didn't remember anything. Back at home, the situation is now increasingly tense. Nathan also said that the corpse hanging from the tree was no longer effective in driving them away. Sharon, who was now desperate, immediately wrote a letter to John. On the way, John increasingly remembered that Nathan, Lucas, Michael, Sharon, and I were doctors. Meanwhile, Nathan, who was still hiding, heard gunshots coming from outside. They both remembered that the 18th was the day when the rescuers came. Nathan immediately got out of there, then started going towards the forest while shouting for help. At that time, some of the military came. At the same time, John was also seen trying to get to Nathan because he heard his screams. However, instead of getting help, Nathan was immediately shot by the military. Shocked to see Nathan dead, John immediately approached Sharon, who was still there. Then they both immediately left there. Likewise, Brown managed to hide from the military. It turns out that the 18th was the day of the military's mass extermination of infected people and survivors. While running away, Sharon was suddenly attacked by an infected woman. I hurt my back. John immediately took him and the two of them immediately hid in the hole with the corpses. As a result, to save them both, John, who had just regained his memory, was forced to decide to re-inject the vaccine into both of their bodies. But before that, Sharon gave John a letter he had written, so that one day, when John reads it, I will remember who they are. The injection started to make them unconscious, and the soldiers were also seen starting to throw the bodies into the hole. Sometime later, John finally regained consciousness, but I didn't know that the person in my lap was my wife, so the letter in his hand was forgotten and fell. And not long after that, another rope fell again, which turned out to be Brown, who returned to save John. At the end of the story, all that remains is Brown and John. In Sharon's letter, it was stated that they were scientists tasked with finding a vaccine for the epidemic virus. Brown is an antibody in making vaccines because I am a person who is immune to the virus and my blood can help them all to make vaccines. Sharon asked John to protect me, and actually from the start, Brown kept trying to make them remember. However, because Brown did not understand their language, the group's memories were delayed. And finally, the film ended.